Good morning, boys and girls. This is Miss Mayanis. Today, we're going to be listening to the story one more time of Curious George Goes Camping. Our special guest, Mr. George, will be reading our story for today. Let's get started. Are you ready?
Curious George Goes Camping by Margaret and H.A. Reyes. This is George. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. This weekend, George and his friend, the man with the yellow hat, had special plans. They were going camping. At the fireside, the man with the yellow hat unpacked their gear, while George looked at all the tents. He saw tents for big families and one just the right size for a puppy. There were even tents on wheels. Would you like to help me put up our tent, George? The man asked. Now, boys and girls, let me ask you a question. George saw tents for big families, one for a puppy, and even what? Yes, he saw tents on wheels. George was happy to help. It would not be hard to set up a tent, he thought. But it wasn't easy. George, why don't you fill our bucket with water at the pump? His friend suggested. We'll need it by our campfire later when we roast marshmallows. Now, what did the man with the yellow hat ask George to do? Yes, he asked George to get a bucket of water for the campfire. Marshmallows! Yeah! George loved marshmallows. He couldn't wait to try them roasted. Now, don't wander off and get into trouble, the man warned. But George did not hear him. He was already gone. At the pump, George worked the handle up and down. Soon, his bucket was full. On the way back down the trail, he saw a family packing up. George watched a girl pour her bucket of water on a campfire. The fire sizzled out. George thought that looked like fun. He poured his bucket of water on the next campfire. Hey! Yelled the camper. We weren't finished with that yet. The camper began to chase George, but George didn't mean to cause trouble. Now he only wanted to hide. He ran into the forest as fast as he could, but the camper's footprints followed close behind. George ran faster and faster. The footprints came closer and closer until suddenly they were passing George. Why, it was not the camper chasing George now. It was a deer. What fun to run with a deer. Forgetting all about the camper and the marshmallows, George ran after the deer. But a little monkey cannot run as fast as a deer in the woods. Now, boys and girls, George was chased by a camper and a what? Yes! A deer! Before long, George was lost and all alone. He felt tired and stopped to rest. At first, he was worried. He was very far from camp, but there were lots of other animals to keep him company. He saw a lizard sunning on a rock and a squirrel chattering in a tree. Then he saw the tail of a black and white kitty peeking out from under a bush. He was curious. Would the kitty like to play? George gently pulled the kitty out. But it was not a kitty. It was a skunk, and it was scared. The skunk lifted its tail and sprayed. Yay! The spray smelled awful. The animals tried to get away. George wanted to get away too, but he could not. The smell was all over him. How would he ever get rid of this awful smell? He wondered. Too bad he could not take a bath in the woods. Then George had an idea. He could wash the smell off in the creek. George jumped into the cold water. He splashed and scrubbed, but he was still smelly, and now he was wet too. But what could he do? George thought and thought. If he climbed up a tree to dry off, would the smell blow away? Now, boys and girls, what did George do after he jumped into the creek? Yes, he climbed a tree. No, even dry and high up in the tree, George did not smell better. Poor George. He wished he hadn't wandered so far from camp. He wished he were roasting marshmallows with his friend. Suddenly, George heard footsteps heading towards him. Someone was coming. It was the forest animals, but they ran right by him. They had seen something scary, and George saw it too. It was a fire. George had gotten into trouble for putting out one fire, but this fire wasn't in the campground. This was an emergency. Quickly, George climbed down the tree and grabbed his bucket. He scooped it full of water in the creek. Then, being careful not to spill, he climbed back up and swung from branch to branch through the trees. When George got close enough to the fire, he reached down and poured the water on the flames. Out went the fire with a big hiss. Just then, George's friend rushed out of the forest with a ranger. "George," he called, "I was afraid you would be here." "It's a good thing you were here, George," the ranger said. "We saw smoke from the campground, but you put this fire out just in time." George was glad to help, and the man with the yellow hat was glad to see that George was safe. But he had a funny look on his face. "George," he asked, "what is that smell?" Back at the campsite, George's friend helped him get rid of the awful smell. After a strange bath in tomato juice, George smelled fine. Now, boys and girls, how did George's friend help him get rid of that skunk smell? Yes, he gave George a bath in tomato juice. Then the man with the yellow hat invited the ranger to cook dinner with them over their own small campfire. "Fires can be nice if you're careful," said the ranger. George agreed, especially for roasting marshmallows.
So that was the end of the story of Curious George Goes Camping. Now, let's get started on today's activity. For today's activity, you will need a paper plate, a sheet of white paper, a black marker, scissors, a glue stick or glue, a brown and peach crayon, and a popsicle stick if you have one. The first thing you're going to use is your paper plate. You're going to grab your brown crayon and color it all up. Once you are finished coloring the back of your paper plate, it should look like this, all brown. After that, you will grab your white sheet of paper and create 2 ears and your face for your monkey plate. Once you are finished, you will grab your peach crayon and color the ears and the face. Next, you will create 2 eyes for your monkey plate to glue on top of its face. Now, grab your scissors and cut everything up to get ready to glue. Once you have cut all of your pieces, now you're ready to glue everything together. Now it's time to glue. The first thing I did was glue the eyes to the face. Now I'm going to apply glue all to the back of the face that I drew so that I can glue it to the plate. So once I've glued it, it should look like this. Next, I'm going to apply glue to the ears. I applied glue towards the bottom area of the ears so that once I glue it, it should look like this. Now, in order to know for sure that the ears are going to stay intact, I'm going to get a little bit of tape and I'm going to cut a piece and attach to the back of the ears on the plate. Once you are done applying the tape to the back of your ears to secure your monkey plate in place, the final thing that you will add will be a popsicle stick so that you are able to hold your monkey paper plate. I attached the popsicle stick with a piece of tape in the front and pieces of tape in the back so that it can stay in place. If you don't have a popsicle stick, that's fine. You can still hold your plate like this with your hands, or if you do have a popsicle stick, you can hold it with your popsicle stick at hand. And there you have it, your very own Curious George. Now, boys and girls, remember, today is exit ticket day and there are 4 steps. Remember, 1, log on to AR. 2, take the test of Curious George Goes Camping. 3, take a picture of your test. And 4, send it to Miss Magallanes. Remember, don't forget to take your test after watching this video and have a lot of fun creating your own Curious George. We'll see you soon. Bye!